Hey guys, how we doing?
Good, coach.
Good.
You guys got me?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Excellent.
Okay,
Gotcha.
good. Hey, one thing, I know we're already recording. My GM and head coach are here, so if I have to abruptly pause,
Fair
It's
enough.
totally fine.
you'll know why.
Yeah. So I
All right.
gotta ask before we really get diving into anything. What's it like in 2022 with COVID protocols as they are now?
Mm.
Working in the NFL. What's that changed into?
I think we've learned how to adapt pretty well since we've been doing it for so long now. But it's social distancing, it's masked up in sessions. Those are the big things. Trying to avoid shared equipment, and as you guys know, that becomes challenging in spotting scenarios and med ball work. And just if you have the resources of a weight room where you don't have to share, that's one thing. But there's a lot of wiping down and cleaning, to say the least.
Right.
And you have to minimize your room numbers. Like there's a lot of things that kind of we've all become really good at. But I also think too, it's allowed us to have a better coaching eye too, with
Mhm.
the smaller rooms and better coach to athlete ratio.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So before we get too deep into this, so Coach Landow, this is Dustin Chadwick.
Hey Dustin, how are you?
Good. I'm excellent.
So we both I was in charge of Fort Knox. He was in charge of JBLM when we were on the DoD project. That's how we met each other.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys helping out with the people that kind of protect us and allow us to sleep well at night. So that's a big job. So thank you guys.
Yeah. No worries.
Appreciate it.
So just to give everyone a background of who you are, where you came from, how did you start in strength and conditioning? And then what did that like transition you into to get to the point you are today?
Sure. I'll give you the long story. Long story short, went to school, got my undergrad in exercise physiology. And when I was coming out, I was graduating in 96. And when I was coming out, graduating in 96, there were certain directions you can go in the industry, but a lot of it was really into physical therapy school, cardiac rehab. It wasn't as mainstream on the strength and conditioning side when I was coming out. I went the cardiac rehab route coming out of school. So I went cardiac pulmonary rehab, and I spent about 18 months doing that, from internship to actually working. So the unique thing about my past is that every step of the way has not been a regret. Every step of the way has helped me for where I am today. And cardiac pulmonary rehab just happens to be the same thing for me. When scenarios arise, I have a background in understanding how to look at warning signs, how to help mitigate a scenario. So long story short, even though it wasn't like straight strength conditioning right away, I always had a healthy relationship in the weight room ever since I was 14 years old, and saw the correlation of strength training, and all of a sudden, wow, I'm jumping higher. Wow, people say, well, how'd you get so fast? And I was too dumb to know at the time that it was maybe that, or did I have good genetics, or just was I just fortunate? And so it was later where you start putting those pieces together of how those things may have helped out. Fast forward outside of cardiac rehab, I went into just general personal training, everything from Gen Pops to middle school and high school age athletes, and just trying to figure it out, reading and, educating myself more into that side of the industry, which led me into really more of a performance model. Working with the Gen Pops was great. You learn a lot of skills and tools from psychology and communication skills and life skills. How to invest properly, how to look at things that are actually helpful in life. So again, like I said, no part of my journey has ever been wasted. Got into working with the middle school, high school age population, and you start. All training's a hypothesis, and you're trying to figure this thing out, and you have results, and you have success, and sometimes you have failures, and sometimes as a younger coach, like it's hard to sit there and say, well, maybe the failures were because of me and the lack of what I knew. And so it's just the evolution of time, and really then took my training model more performance, and strictly worked with high school combine, and got into that kind of thing, and working on those performance models and continuing to sharpen my education and go to different biomechanics classes, courses, extended education, soft tissue courses. So I became a hands-on practitioner as well. And so at that time, I had created a pretty nice following of combine training. And my first year of combine training was 98, 99.
Okay.
And,
Wow, that's wild. Yeah.
that's wild. I'm old.
Yeah.
And I had some studs, I had, a host of first rounders and second rounders. I was like, oh, this is easy. And that's at a time where combine prep was very, very few people were doing it. I think you had the Tom Shaws. I think you had the Mark Verstegens down at IMG at that time. And there was very few people really doing it. And so it was exciting to be a part of that early on and then just see what it's turned into now. And then, after that, that was in the athletic club, and I was an athletic director. I was an operations manager. I learned a lot of skills along the way that ultimately taught me the opportunity of how to run a business, and became the director of performance for Velocity Sports. 3 to 4 years of that, those models were very challenging and difficult. And after that, I parlayed into working with an orthopedic firm, Steadman Hawkins Orthopedic, where I became the performance realm of what they were doing already from the surgical side and the physical therapy side, and built out that wing. And now ultimately what has become Landow Performance. So long story short, I've taken all those steps along the way to help cultivate and build a craft. It's utilizing some of those general principles to become more specific in what it is you do. And after, owning and running Landow Performance for the time I had, for the last 4 years, I've been the head strength coach for the Denver Broncos. So a very eclectic role. But during my time at Steadman Hawkins and Landow Performance, I worked with teams. I was a consultant to the USA women's team for 2 Olympic bids. I worked with USA bobsled and skeleton. I've been a consultant for dozens of professional teams in Major League Baseball, NFL, NCAA. So I've had the opportunity to work with teams all the way along. And combine prep, it's a kind of a team environment. You've got 30 plus guys and they're all going after the same goal. So, I wasn't just this private sector guy who ended up in team sport. I've always been involved in team sport.
Okay. Rock on. When you were doing the combine prep, how the 2 big questions I always get about combine prep, of course, everyone wants to know their 225 rep test, how to increase that. That's like the big thing. My thing's always been like the vertical jump. Could you shed your light on those 2 subjects, either one first?
Yeah, I'd love to. I've got a great paralleled story, if you guys want to hear it, of an extraordinary power lifter in Blaine, Sumner.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So Blaine, he was coming out for the draft, and he was at Colorado School of Mines, and he called me up. He wanted to train. I heard I heard you're the guy to go to, whatever. And so he and I met in person. I met with his dad, and Blaine was already lifting very, very heavy, and he was very strong. And he came to me. He's like, I'm really concerned that my strength's going to go down getting ready for combine prep. And I said, well, here's the ironic thing about it. I said, you're going to touch some pretty maximal loads at times. I said, but I will promise you this, your speed strength and your elastic abilities will get better. And that is ultimately going to just help your strength. And so it was pretty cool. So I can give you, because everybody knows Blaine, he came in, he was 335 pounds at the time. He came in, he pre-tested at 37 reps on the bench press, pretty damn good.
Pretty good. Not bad. Not bad.
I was like, oh, you're good. Pre-tested at 37. His vertical jump was right at 30, for 330 pounds. I was like, okay. And his broad jump was 8, 9. And so I was like, those are pretty respectable numbers for 330. And, he doesn't necessarily have great levers. And so, for me, those were good power output numbers. And so, we got through the course of his training. And again, the training, we do a lot of PAP, and we do a lot of advanced strategies, which a guy like Blaine, who has such a history of lifting, that really benefits him significantly with his training age. And, we get to his testing day, and he vertical jumps 36.5 inches.
Wow.
Broad jumps,
Wow.
36.5 inches. Vertical 36.5. He broad jumps right at 9:10. He was so mad he didn't hit 10 feet, but he ran 5.340. And this guy doesn't have the longest legs, and at 335 pounds, it was pretty remarkable. But it was cool to see a guy who had so much history in the weight room. And we just changed a couple things, some PAP methods, some speed strength methods. And to see him too. Oh, and the other thing I didn't tell you guys, he hit 52 or 55 reps on the bench. So like,
Gosh,
that's delicious. That's so great.
He did claim on his pre-test that he was sick.
Oh,
And that's why he only got 37. But
yeah.
Blaine was a great guy and he was super coachable. But to get back to the original question, the 225, I look at it a twofold. Like if I can work on, maximal strength and muscular endurance, I can get a pretty good window of a double peak when it comes to their 225. So I still look at maximal strength, raising maximal strength. Theoretically, I should be able to do more repetitions, and ultimately working on the skill of muscular endurance. If I can get both of those to converge with the right taper, should turn out pretty well. So that's how I look at that. When I look at vertical jump, there's a whole host of reasons of vertical jump. To me, vertical jump and broad jump and the 10-yard, those are gold standard numbers. Those are gold standard numbers that are simple and easy for the stakeholders to make decisions of. This person has a high ceiling of performance and this person has a low ceiling of performance. So if I have 10,000 athletes I'm looking at, and I can look at one position group and say anybody with the offensive lineman will say anybody with a 30 and above vertical jump, I know their ceiling is probably going to be higher athletically.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the key stakes that you look at. And when I'm looking at increasing vertical jump, there's a couple things. One, it's the skill of the test. I'll be honest with you, like so many people use the Vertec. I mean, the Vertec is still used, and I think it's because they have decades of data on it. But it's funny to me, all the people that have done jump training or PAP methods, and they've never once done it on the Vertec, because that's a skill in itself of where do you hit the apex of the jump? Where do you stand? How does your center of mass change as you loft and go into flight? And you can see the people that didn't spend much time on it when they're testing it. So, a lot of our PAP methods, as dumb as it sounds, are with the test.
That's
no,
fair.
and I don't think it is dumb. And if anything, it just kind of speaks to the fact that I think a lot of coaches, you'd probably agree with this. You spend a lot of time over coaching, and you actually take these. It's like the bell curve, the idiot in the beginning and the expert at the end. They're saying the exact same thing. The idiot doesn't know why, and the expert knows exactly why. And then you have all the people in the middle of the bell curve that are over analyzing all the crap.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A Dunning-Kruger effect, kind of.
Yes, exactly. The Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
You see it all the time.
Yeah. Hell, I was living proof of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
We all fall victim to it too. And it's not out of, I mean, maybe you could say ignorance, but it's just that simple fact. There's so much to digest in this realm. And that's why I think it's hard to find anyone that has, the wisdom of from when you started your career, because you're 25, maybe approaching 30. Yeah. So because a lot of guys I see in your age class that have been coaching that long, their career goes the opposite direction, and they become irrelevant because they find these pedestals that they're going to die on. You bring all this wisdom to like pre-internet when people are putting stuff out to now. The progression that you've made, the transitions that you've seen over the industry, I think there's so many avenues we can go with there, but to go in the direction that you have, which has been this, linear progression, basically, I have to imagine that you've crossed all these barriers of having to maybe not reinvent yourself, but, adapt over time and continue to make this progress and eat the meat and spit out the bones. I know that's a real, broad thing that you could talk about, but maybe some of the bigger points of where you made those progressions, where you made those changes, what you've seen change that's really valuable from when you started to where you are now. I mean, you can go any direction with that probably.
Sure. I'll try to hit that as clean as I can. I think the best thing that I have done in my career is, as I said earlier, is that I've never looked at any point in my career as like, oh, that was a waste of time, or I can't believe I spent almost 2 years in cardiac and pulmonary rehab. I've never looked at it like that, first and foremost. I will say, I believe I've always watered the grass I stood on. So whatever domain of the field I was in, like, it was important to me to do a very good job, and that it was the best place to be at the moment. So I was never job, I see so many coaches now today, they're job hunting or their job,
Yep.
they're leapfrogging for this job. And if they have this behind their name, they'll have this job. And I never did that. And those were important things for me from a principal standpoint. I will say the other thing I did that was kept me wise, if you will, because I was pretty dumb early on. We all think we're so good early on. And going back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, I do think like there's a special element of passion that somebody has when they fall into that. Somebody has fallen in love with something, and so they think they know, and they think they know, and they beat their chest, and it's a great passion that they have for it, but they haven't done enough saturation of work to truly maybe understand all the complex layers of the subject. And you can look at any subject for that matter. But I've surrounded myself with really good mentors. And I've picked my mentors in so many different realms. It wasn't just like, who's the best strength guy, who's the best speed guy. It was trying to find a mixture of people. Tom Purvis, who's a biomechanical wizard. Greg Roscoff, who invented muscle activation techniques, who taught me more about muscle physiology and the sensitivity of the neuromuscular system. And then having a hands-on technique, which I think has been very helpful in my career path. But Loren Seagrave, who, as everybody knows, he's a world-class sprints coach, track and field coach. Dan Paff, world-class track and field, and has a great eye for movement, even in multi-directional planes. And then Stephen Plisk, who was one of my dearest mentors. He comes off the Mike Stone tree, and Stephen Plisk, I think, is one of the best people who understood periodization and programming, and did it in a digestible manner for like team sports. Greg Half and different people in those areas, I became friends with, and I was able to ask them questions, and I was able to sit there and say, I'm struggling on this, I'm struggling on that, and being able to get their feedback and their wisdom and just shut up and listen. Most valuable things I've done.
Yeah. Well, knowing all those remarkable people who are very knowledgeable in their field, do you ever find that? And I know I do this perpetually, but every 6 to 8 months, I'll look back at people I've worked with, teams I've worked with. And do you look back at like the previous season or off season, in season, 6 months after the fact, and think, if I had done D, E, and F better, I would have been A, B, and C would have been so much sharper?
Yeah, I think if you're real with yourself as a practitioner, you're having an internal audit every 3 to 6 months and saying, okay, what do we do well? What do we do good? And you're being honest with yourself, hopefully. What I've tried to do is establish a team here on my staff that, I think a lot of people will sit there and say, well, Loren's a movement guy and he's going to hire movement coaches. And that's the furthest thing from the truth, because I want people to see my blind spot. I want to be able to have people see where my blind spots are, and I want to be able to help them where their blind spots are. So to me, when I'm constructing a staff, it's to be able to have those hard, critical conversations and say, where did we miss this? What we hit well? And to be able to have those honest conversations. I think when you're younger as a coach, and maybe I'm speaking just to me, it was really hard to hear some of that feedback early on, because you want to be taken so legitimate in our field, because there's really nothing that says you're legitimate or not. And so it's like, I always tell people, like, our industry has a degree of being like the wild, wild west, and just information is being spewed, and it might be good information, but it's not ethically right, or it's not right for every individual. If I want to be a CPA, I have to take certain tests, and I have to do certain things, and I have to be re-audited. And in our industry, it's a little bit different. So I think if you're real with yourself and you surround yourself with people that can help minimize confirmation bias, I think that helps you build a right team and look back historically at your program. Shoot, how many times have you guys looked back at programming years ago and you're like, what was I doing? Number one.
What was I thinking?
Yeah, what was I thinking? And then sometimes I look and I go, wow, I'm actually kind of impressed with myself.
Yeah.
I've had both the scenarios.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, 100%. 100%. Yes. But I mean, you have to start somewhere. But yeah, I think if you haven't had that experience, that just tells you you're not taking place in those self audits that are critical, to take that, that look at yourself, for sure.
And I'd say like for you guys and for me and for anybody who's in like the performance realm, like self audits are all the time. They're all the time from, whether it's we're looking at 1 rep max or whatever you're testing or evaluating, or ultimately how there's performance. And so there's always the self audits. And then you have to go back and back engineer and say, okay, what could we have theoretically changed or made better or influenced positively or negatively?
Yeah.
There's so many variables of why something happens, but you do have to sit back and you have to back engineer every scenario and say, did we hit this? Did we miss this? And combine prep, it's funny, right? You guys asked the question about combine prep earlier, and I always tell the guy who runs it for me now, I always say, look, I said, when you hit your taper, and he goes, when? I said, you tell me the jump numbers at the beginning of their pro day, and I'll tell you they're going to PR in their sprint. That gives you a heck of an indication if you hit your taper right on. So, you have little litmus tests along the way that let you know that maybe you hit it right or you missed it.
Okay. Now, are those tests different from year to year? Do you find based on the type of people you're getting in or who are working, if they're hard workers or if they're kind of lazier or if they're genetically gifted? Does it vary a little bit, or do numbers not lie?
No, I would say this, like, back when I did combine prep for 18 years, and back when I was doing it, I could say this, like, everybody's got their anecdotal, everybody increased by this, but everybody did get better because we taught them tricks of the trade. We did good strategies. I think we were pretty smart in how we tapered and all that. But I will say this, like the kids who had like, a good saturation, or like maybe they had a consistent strength coach for 4 years of college, we tend to find better gains than somebody that had the coach every year. Kind of thing. So, there were different things from a training age standpoint that would really show up. But I think the other one, I'll tell you, in combine prep, it's one of the most unique times of an athlete's life. Like, it's the one time I've always felt that the athletes are so insecure. They're bought in beyond belief to listen to what you have to say, because the window of opportunity and their insecurities are so high, because most of these guys have, if they weren't a wrestler or in track and field, rarely have competed solo. And they're going to compete solo at the combine and pro day. So that's a big deal. So trying to have them understand, like, buying into the process, and they see incremental gains in some of those events. So it just helps with the buy-in process. So genetics aside and training history aside, like if they put in that density of work in that 6 to 8 window, and then you hit a taper right, nearly everybody across the board, genetics aside, has very positive results.
Yeah. That's funny that you bring that up, just because I was a director at a Division I university for, number of years before I got into this. I've been in the college sector for the bulk of my career, and I'd have, athletes that for whatever reason, scouts come out, you have a few guys that are going to compete in that combine that are questionable as far as their career passing where they're at right now. And, their work ethic is definitely not a 10 out of 10, but all of a sudden you have guys that are willing to fork out thousands of dollars to go to a combine camp. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, where did this come from? Where did this, just priorities just change tremendously in that environment because of the insecurity and the motivation that comes from that. It is wild to watch that happen. Because as a college coach, I'm not thinking about combine prep that often. Those guys that are in that situation, I want them to look good on those days. But I would say in large, they were going to perform well had they not prepped for it at all. They're a good athlete, and they're going to do well. But then you just have this time where you can make them really shine and look good. And obviously there is a lot of there's a lot of judgment on paper when it comes to those tests and what scouts you're looking at, and some of those things. Different places are looking at different stuff and weighing it differently. But that is a very unique thing that you bring up as far as like that focus that comes when that becomes a real thing on the table.
Well, and one thing that I tended to do as well, day one of combine prep, is I would stand in front of all of them, and I would give, a skills guy, whether it's a DB or a wideout, I give him a stopwatch. And I tell them, I said, as fast as you can, hit start and stop. And almost always it comes out to 0.2 of a second.
Yeah.
And if I told him, I said, this is what you just did with your finger was the difference between you running a 4.6 and a 4.4. And all of a sudden you provided context to this race. And now you start to plant the seed. Like every detail I tell you in the start, the angles, everything matters, because we're talking about hundreds of seconds, tens of seconds that make a big deal. Yeah. And so I do that. And then the other thing I do is like, hey, yeah, you ran a 3.98 pro shuttle in college. How many chances did you get to do that? Until I got my fastest time. I said, you have one chance. I said, you have one rep. And so you have got to repeat these dance steps. So then, when you get that one chance, when it's the biggest amount of insecurity and fear and anxiety at one time, how do you perform it? And so, my combine prep was pretty simple. It's like, we know the answers to the test.
Yeah.
Let's just keep hitting them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you combine prepping? How long, or like you did for 18 years? At what point is 18 years, or did it ever come across that dealing with that level of stress and anxiety between their ears, you had to have like a sports psychologist come on?
So I always brought in somebody who would talk to them in the middle of the training and gave them strategies and tools. And that's one thing I can always say we did a really good job of providing those other resources. But those guys, it's kind of a third. A third don't want to hear it. A third want to hear it. And a third may want to hear it. And a third are like all in.
Yeah.
And so, depending on who it was in front of, it was helpful. I will say this, once it became the day, oh man, you wish that person was there on site for him. and I ended up doing a lot of the talking off the ledge or those kind of things. And to me, those are some of the most fun moments in coaching, is when you have an athlete who's scared to death and you're kind of coming off the ledge and let them know, like, dude, this is what you do, man. This is what you're preparing for. Let's go. Let's have some fun.
Right.
And those were always fun, rewarding moments for sure.
Yeah. Or are you of the thought where if you're at the combine or they're running their pro day and they run their 40 and it's not great, do you tell them the time, or do you just like click it, or you see what the time is and just kind of give them a thumbs up, like, keep going, and just let them just finish their day? Or do you tell them then?
No,
so that they spike up?
No, you have to tell them then.
Okay.
You have to, because they have, say it's their first 40, they have one more chance.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty good story on that. Exactly. I had a kid who was just a monster, incredibly strong, explosive, and he struggled. He was a defensive lineman, and it was one of those things, like if he hit his first 3 steps right, he was going to run a sub 5. If he didn't, he was going to run like 5.1. Okay. Yeah. And we're talking D lineman, like you run sub 5 and people are talking.
Yeah.
You run 5.1, they're like, okay. Well, he had a pretty high grade on him anyway, so they were expecting the sub 5. And the entire time of training, he kept screwing up a couple of the steps, and not to get too technical, but coming right out of his start, he's, right into heel, pulling the heel up to his rear end, and he's just wasting time. He's not getting great angles, not getting great shank angles for good power output and projection. But even so, once I go to the combine, I'm with them. And we're going over their starts and the last minute stuff, and he's still doing it. And I turned to my guy and I was like, if he doesn't figure this out, this is going to be a problem. And I was really pretty brash with him the last 3 weeks. I'm like, you need to figure this out. Like, it's the difference. And he'd always say, yeah, I got you, coach. I got you, coach. And so he, this is a true story. Really funny. So he runs his first 40, and I'm at the combine, but I'm at a hotel watching it live on NFL Network. He runs his 40. And it's exactly what I told you. It was like 5.08, 5.10. And I'm like, man, he did exactly what he's been doing this whole time. I'm not surprised, but I'm still disappointed. I look down at my phone and I'm getting a call from him. And he's calling me and say, did you see that? I said, yes. He said, what do I need to do? I go, I am telling you, if you do not listen to me, you're going to run the same result. I need you to finally listen to me. And I said, I need your head down. I need you to punch forward. I need you to project out, just giving him some simple cues that he's been hearing this whole time, but he's been reluctant to implement. And it was the first time where I heard him say, yes, sir. because everything is like, I got you. I
Yep.
got you.
Oh,
And it was
yeah.
the first time we were on the phone. He goes, yes, sir. He comes back and he runs like a 495. And, and so, yes, I'm giving you some really long-winded stories.
No,
but
no.
No, this is good.
Yeah, it's
That's a
good.
profound moment right there.
Yeah.
Dude, like I turned to my guy. I was like, man, that's like the oddest coaching I've ever done in my life right there. So that was odd. I said, but it had a positive result and it worked out well. He became a first-round draft pick, and he probably was going to be anyway.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see the change. But to your point, I'm like, you need to figure this out right now. Like, there's no other chance.
Yeah.
And so I've had, probably 10 of those hard conversations. Like, I've seen those coaches all the time who are like, oh my God, 4-3, you're killing it. You're killing it. And then they go, oh, the scouts must have had something different. Oh man, those scouts, man, the way they test you. I was always of the idea that I need to be very, very honest with them all the way through to help them problem solve as we're getting to the big dance. I saw it all the time where coaches would lie to them in the training what they were running, and then once they got to wherever they were testing, they would blame it on the testers and the scouts, and that's not accurate.
No. Well,
Yeah.
and we see it too. I don't know if the players always pay attention, but rarely do you see a scout take their own time. They all look over each other's shoulders and ask each other what everyone's doing, because they don't trust themselves as much as, because they know, just like the test that you had them do, click that stopwatch. They're all conversing. If a scout gets a good time, he's gonna go corroborate it with the rest of the scouts.
Hey, did you guys get this as well? Yeah. Exactly right. So for me, being honest in all these processes, even in the MMA side of things, like you got to be honest with these athletes, and you got to tell them where their gaps are, and you can't be worried about hurting feelings. What's the old adage? If I tell you the truth, you're going to hate me for a day. If I tell you a lie, you're going to hate me forever.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think that's how we have to operate as coaches.
Well, yeah, and you get that as a player coming in. I've got players that have been, it's like a high school coming into college. You can tell a kid that's been pumped up, and this is more than being a big, big fish in a small pond. They've been lied to, and their numbers have been fabricated in their head a little bit, and they have this thing conjured up, and that along those same lines, it's easier to lie to someone than convince them that they've been lied to. And I just, the worst interactions I've had with a college athlete is when I'm not trying to tear down whoever got you to this point mentally, but we've got to remove some of this, because you're going to not be able to make progress. You got a roadblock mentally because you have all these things drummed up in your head. And because I'm asking you to regress this movement or tape, whatever it might be, they just mentally start to break down. And that rebuilding process is sometimes, because it's mental, not physical, can be a heck of a thing to try to fix.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Do you find after a season, after an in-season, like now going into off season, when they come in, like you have to completely rebuild some of their movements, or your in season, is it you have fundamental movements you're gonna hound all year that they just have on a rotating basis in their mind?
Yeah. Are you talking weight room specific or specific?
Either way. I mean, weight room for now, simplicity wise, why not?
I would say sometimes some of the struggle in the NFL is ultimately the time you actually have with the athlete. You don't have as much time as you may think, and so because of that, you really have to pick your spots of what it is that you're going to really spend your time on. So the biggest thing that I do, from a movement standpoint, is I just rehearse patterns. And I rehearse patterns. I build them into the warm-ups, and I may do some, to me, like if you look at football, it's heavily an acceleration-based sport. So if all my positions understand how to accelerate, and they've grooved and worked on patterns like, hey, go sprint, go run, and a lot of those patterns will show themselves through. So I will say, like, they probably get daily dripping of it in season. Off season, when we get into our off season program, they'll get a lot more of that. But the in season model is pretty tough, because the only chance I have to do much movement is 10 minutes of stretch before practice. So unless I'm building in some specific things to my runners, in their lifting sessions, which we do it from time to time, but you don't have a ton of time. So the off season is really your best window to implement a lot of the movement side. So The guys now who have been with me for a pretty good amount of time, my 4 years here, and if they've been here as well, their movement's pretty solid, and there's not much I have to do to change or clean up. And I'm less of a change your mechanics guy now than I used to be, because it's that wisdom thing where you understand that everybody's mechanics are unique to them for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I see some inefficiencies that they're not biological, they're not skeletal, they're not, if I see some of those issues, then yes, quick cue, let me get you in the most efficient position, boom, let's move on. So, and then I drip those during the process. And a lot of my drills are really meant to teach the right positions, and hey, you go do what you do now.
Okay. For top end speed, it's this for the first 5 yards, 5 meters. What are your top 3 red flags when you see someone going where, okay, that's not just your unique pattern. That's a red flag. We need to change it.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. Like if we're just talking, like, let's just talk linear locomotion. Let's not talk like a defensive end coming off the ball. Let's just talk linear locomotion and say somebody's coming out of a 2 or 3 point stance. Number one is like a lack of projection out. So understanding how to push off both feet and get projection out horizontally. A lot of guys, you hear the old adage, oh, he stood straight up.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of factors of why that person may have stood straight up. They might feel that getting up makes them fast. They may not feel comfortable projecting. They may not get ultimate good shin angle. They may not have the range of motion to get the shin angle. It could be like lack of awareness or skeletal inhibition or inability based on bony skeletal issues. So that's one of the things, is the lack of understanding of projection. The other one is like truly the path of your first couple strides. Like, is it an aggressive butt kick type action, which is one, it doesn't allow you to get to the appropriate angles. I'm all about, like, we need to produce more force in less time. And part of the less time is hitting the right angles at the right time. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of, some people inherently figure it out, but most people are like, they're spinning their wheels like the road runner coming out of a start.
Yeah.
So that's why I've always said, like, when athletes wear cleats, it's kind of like a fail safe. Cleats, if I'm in tennis shoes and I'm on turf and I go into the road, the cycling mechanics out of acceleration, I'm gonna fall right on my face. So cleats kind of, they help you a little bit, kind of have bad mechanics. So I'm a big fan of, like, hey, let's put someone in tennis shoes and let them run on some of the field turf and see what happens, because it's incredible feedback. The other thing that I tend to see as well is like false leans, right? Hey, coach told me to stay low for 20 yards. And so they just stay low. And usually their stay low is by hinging, not by projection lean. So for me, looking at those kind of things, and those are the things I'll try to really clean up. Now, let's take that concept and let's move it to football. Okay. If I tell my running back to extend the hips and get your projection lean, he's going to get hit by a linebacker and he's going backwards. So there's times where you have to hinge. You have to change your center of mass and your center of gravity positions to be able to get forward momentum and to keep balance. Like, there's a time to do those things. So that's one thing I think is very concerning when people teach technical models and they don't know how to apply the technical model to the sport. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm following.
So you've got to be able to take the technical model, teach what is right to get good mechanics, but then don't overcoach it when they go out and they're running their route off press coverage. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't give your chest up, you don't get the hip split extended. You're going to have to drop the hips. You're going to have to do certain things to get off of press. My running backs going through the hole, like if they try to run like a sprinter, it's going to be bad. They have to have different times that they augment and change shapes or change those positions. Mm-hmm. And let me go back to this, because everything is like action reaction when it comes to acceleration sprinting. So if you have that person who pops vertical, they can't create the appropriate joint angle to be able to drive back, which is inherently acceleration. So everything is predicated on everything else. Mm-hmm. So if I pop straight up, I'm not going to get the thigh position that I want to get the shank angle. And if I can't get those shank angles, I'm not going to be able to drive behind me. So everything kind of, when you say everything matters, it kind of does.
Yeah.
And that's why I teach so much of the marching and the resisted marches and some of those things, because they teach inherently the right pattern. And then I just tell them, hey, go be you now on the field.
Yeah.
Right. Like the one big thing that I know Dustin, this is an issue with his base as well, his soldiers, my soldiers, almost every base soldier, is that sprint. I mean, it's like 20, 40 meters, 20, 40, 20, 40 yards. that's the big thing. They all have been rucking their entire lives and can go for miles. But if they need to go from point A to point B really fast, it looks like garbage. So that's one of the big things we have to hit on is getting them off the line and getting that first 5-10 meters. And it looks at least somewhat good. And they're not what you're saying. They're cycling. That's a big issue. We see like the heels come up kicking the butt.
Yeah.
So they think that's going to give them more projection. It doesn't.
Yeah. And I think the thing that, I've worked with very few tactical populations, but, I got to believe the challenge is, footwear, the challenge is surface, the challenge is so many things once they get into their needs of their job. And so I think sometimes it goes back to that whole thing, like there's a technical model and then there's a realistic model for the job that's being done.
There you go.
Hats off to you guys for the work that you do with them. Seriously.
It creates a weird paradigm because, we see this, it's the same conversation that we're having, in relation to the combine training and actually playing the sport. We do the same thing with, these are the tests I have to pass as a soldier to keep my job. And these are the skills that I would like to have in a combat situation that are going to protect my life and whoever's with me. Totally opposing things at times. And that's one of those things too. It's a paradigm thing that as a strength coach, I don't like this. We should be, if this is our goal, why add in this distraction? Obviously that's a difficult, unfavorable conversation to have sometimes because you're trying to change some stuff that's ingrained in a sector that's been doing things that way for a long time. And who is Joe Schmo's strength coach to come in and say that we're doing something that isn't of value?
It's a weird dichotomy when you're looking at preparing for a test that ultimately gets you the job, and then ultimately what are the KPIs of the job. And it's an interesting dichotomy, and I know I got to take care of this, but now here's where the real work begins.
Right.
So going through KPI, do you have a certain, as opposed to in season, off season, and OTAs, do you have certain indicators you're looking at during those times? I know you and I briefly discussed the way you actually program. Can you go through your programming for a year for an NFL, and what are you actually looking for during each of those sections?
Yeah, I think, if you look at all the KPIs, you pick your sport that you want to, let's say football, and you can sit there and say, what are the trainable qualities? We can talk about strength, power, speed, mobility, stability, neuromuscular coordination, change of agility, however you want to term these things. These are all the trainable qualities in our tool bag, right? And it's relatively a concurrent model because the sport itself is concurrent. There's times you need to be strong, there's times you need to be powerful, there's times you need to be fast. And so what I try to do is sit there and say, okay, my bigs, okay, what are the KPIs that are most advantageous for their success? Hey, they need to be strong, they need to be powerful, they need to have quick, agile feet, and they need to be able to move in a phone booth pretty well. My runners, strength and power is very important because they ultimately help with speed development and so many other athletic attributes. But they need to run, and they need to accelerate, and they need to decelerate, and they need to hit top end speed. And so what you do is, I think, most teams go bigs, middle, and skills, and they look at the whole group and say, okay, you can argue every position group needs all of those trainable qualities that I mentioned at the beginning. They all need them. It's just a matter of who gets more of what. And that's the way I've always looked at it. Like, everybody needs all, some need more of others. And that can be based on their position. It can be based on their development, that they need more of these other things. So that's kind of how I look at it. With that being said, my models they're concurrent in nature because I'm trying to develop multiple qualities. But when we look at the weight room aside, like I am, trying to block in the time windows that I have to block. Our off seasons have been so narrowed that you don't get a lot of saturation of training. And so when the guys come in to me, the first couple of weeks of our off-season program, they're 100% with the strength. Okay. And in that time, I can sit there and say, okay, I've got to read the room, and I got to sit there and say, it's the law of the thirds again. Some guys haven't done anything. Some guys have done something, and some guys maybe have done too much. And so you have to kind of read that room and understand, but at the same time, like, you're going to give everybody all, you're going to pick and choose what they're getting based on KPIs. When they come into me, it's like, I kind of hate the terms sometimes that we put to our industry, but it's 2-week anatomical adaptation, whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm just trying to get the guys into the weight room, get some movement, see how they respond to soreness, see, I got to see what your capacity is like leading up to this point. But then I make a pretty quick trend, because these guys are elites. These guys are elites and they're freaks. And so, like, I don't have to have a block of 6 to 8 weeks of this. Like, I can move qualities relatively quickly based on, one, training histories, but two, their genetic abilities to adapt. So, I might start with like a 2-week anatomical adaptation. I don't go crazy in the high reps, because I'm gonna start migrating down to my strength windows, and I'll live in my strength windows for about 3 weeks, and then I'll go into maximal strength and power conversion. And so, to me, my ultimate goal is to, once I get them, right here is where they come in, and this is general physical preparation, and this is specific. And as they start to go through our OT off-season program, it shifts. And so football gets more attention. And so, to me, I've always believed, like, the person who controls the periodization is the person who has the time. And so for me, when they start making their shift onto the field, like, that's their specific prep. And I need to make sure I'm doing things that are still helping us build, strength capabilities and power capabilities. But I also know, like, I also have to give some leeway to what's happening on the field, because those speed power qualities are happening out there as well. So to me, it's a healthy balance. But like I said, these are like, micro blocks, if you will, of block training, given the deep saturation within those windows. And then once they leave here from minicamp, they've got about 5 weeks off. So the way I look at it is, I go into more of a weekly undulated model, where I sit there and say, okay, let me get one more week of some of that higher rep type work that first week. And then I start narrowing it down to the strength, down to the power, and then the speed before they come to training camp. Now, when I'm talking speed qualities in the weight room, but we're still doing strength retention. But at the same time, I'm building conditioning capabilities for them to be able to be ready for training camp. So you're trying to develop multiple qualities simultaneously, which you guys know it's not ideal, but it's kind of the cards you're dealt with. So in that 5-week block, I try to sit there and say, we're going to touch on this for a week. Because if I don't touch on some sort of volume-based training and saturation, like they had that back in April, I got to give it to them now to help retention of cross-sectional area, whatever we want to argue. If I don't do that, then they're not going to get that in training camp. I'm not going to dose them with those types of volumes in training camp, in season. So to me, I find windows where I can hit certain qualities, and they're unique in themselves. Like, you put one of these guys into 3x5s, 4x5s, like, they retain cross-sectional area very well.
I'm sure.
They're very freaky. These guys can retain these qualities in doubles and triples and singles, and but we still do the same thing once we get in season, where now I'll go into more of a daily undulated. I have an absolute effort day, a dynamic effort day, and a repeat effort day. But all those days have their supplementary exercises, their auxiliary-based exercises attached to them to help retain other qualities throughout the season.
You mentioned maximal strength before, and you just threw right there, absolute strength. Are you saying like a 1-rep max, or like what you can do for the day? X amount of reps. Like, what are we?
So I would say in season, the heaviest you'll probably see us go is 80-85%.
Okay.
In season, to me, like, what's the window that I can retain strength? And I don't want to talk about minimal effective dose, because that can kind of get bastardized. But I have to again think about the field. I have to think about the battle. These guys aren't just lifting on the platform. These guys are colliding, and they're things. They're very traumatic things. And say we're going off of percentage numbers from May or June or July. Well, those percentages, like, I might be working off of a 75. Well, in season, that might actually now become their 80-85%. So if you're trying to work 90-95 in season, you might be super macro. You want to retain strength in season. And I think, we have different things that allow us to show that we've done a good job with that. But, the number one ability is availability. And the last thing you ever want to do is create unavailability in your room, based on your room. So
Yes.
you do have to, you think of the qualities and say, how much do I need of this to be able to retain that?
Mhm.
I will say, like, our players are really good at communicating. They're
Okay.
really good at communicating. So this guy might want to, hey, we're at a 70% day. Hey, coach, I'm feeling good. Boom, let's go. Take it up.
Mhm.
And so we have that latitude. Or a guy might say, hey, I had 80 snaps. I feel like crap.
Yeah.
Dude, regen. We're going to pull it back. Let's go some goblet squats. Let's just work some regen.
Yeah.
And so, like, you do have to have a fluid mindset with it.
Yeah. I would say at that level,
In
the
my
amount of,
experience.
yeah, no, absolutely. No, at that level, I imagine the sheer mental stress that
Mhm.
they're under too is just, they come into a weight room, you're like, all right, go and do like a 90% above lift. Like that's not gonna, that ain't gonna, that's gonna do more harm than good.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got to, you've got to do right by the guys. And sometimes we look at things on papers and we need to do this today. And then you read the room, you're like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. It's not going to
Yes.
happen today.
So you've actually
Yep.
changed like your battle plan. They walk in, you see them, like, oh, we're not doing that today.
Yeah, and I would say that happens for sure more in training camp than in season.
Really?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that happens more in training camp. Just the dog days of camp, like you've really got to be adaptable and fluid. But in season, like we've made adjustments and adaptations, but they weren't. They didn't swing the pendulum as much as it can in camp.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before, this is kind of playing off the weight room still, but in our previous conversation we had, you said people think I'm a big movement guy, and you are,
Mhm.
but the amount of you in a weight room, people are shocked. And I love that. It tickled me pink. I loved it. And you mentioned speed strength before, because you were talking about absolute strength and speed strength. When they peak together, they're both going to go up, help each other out.
Mm.
What are you doing for speed, strength, and power? Are you just a fan of straight weight moving at a fast? Are you a 10 unit guy? Are you an accommodating resistance guy? Primarily,
Yeah.
I know you can use everything, but if you had to pick one thing.
I would say one, we utilize gym aware, and what we have found, our players hate to go light. They do. It's the truth. They hate to go light.
Yeah.
And one thing I have found that is if I add accommodating resistance, if I add chains, if I add bands, if I add something, it's different. It feels different. And I can feel myself moving it fast, and it creates intent. I'd say with the gym wares, the same thing. It's that ultimate, that biofeedback right away, rep to rep, and competition. Oh man, we used to, we'd put it on like, our average velocity, peak velocities, and guys would talk about their speeds, and they really didn't. It was a hard thing for them to wrap their brain around. So I turned to my coaches like, how dumb are we? Let's just put it to watts. Just to put to watts and let them understand high score.
Yeah.
And man, was that fun to watch these guys compete, go after it. It was really cool to see. So yes, with the speed strength methods, like those are different things. Brian Mann's work. I've been a good friend with Brian Mann for a while, and I've really adapted some of his strategies. And I like it as a changeup. I like it for the intent. And the competition that it creates.
Yeah. What rep range do you top out on for power?
If you're talking about like how high are my reps?
Yeah, per set. Like what's like I won't go over 3 reps.
I won't go over fives.
Won't go over fives.
Won't go over fives. I probably live at threes a lot.
Yeah.
My strength and power rep ranges are very, very similar.
Okay.
Very, very similar. I won't go over fives. If I'm looking at maximal strength, and depend on where I'm at in a block, like I won't go over fives, and threes tend to be a pretty good sweet spot for me.
Okay. Yeah. What
how about you guys?
Well, for me, I'm a West Side guy, so I love a good triple on a speed day. I love a good triple. Oh yeah, absolutely. Triples
I think
and
we
doubles.
probably live with triples a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dustin, what about you?
I mean, it changes, I think, a little with the population, because I've had such a cross section. I'd say threes were a lot more prevalent in a college setting, as opposed to now I have a lot of younger athletes, and I see a little bit of value in a few more repetitions too, especially because of just, I might have a couple bad reps, instill things at times, and hey, stop, reset, let's get a couple more. So it ends up being closer to, probably fives and things like that. So I guess that'd be the only variance to things like that.
And I would say it matters. And to me, it really matters on where you're at. Like, if you're in your build up sets and you want to add a little more density to work, hey, we're going to go,
Right.
3x5, then we're going to go 2x3. And, we're working on these qualities, but I'm getting some density of work on the front end and hopefully a little PAP leading into those triples.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Do you find for that strength, if you're working on triples for strength, do you work up to a top triple, or do you just have them go through a warm-up activation and then, all right, get the weight on the bar and just start at that triple weight?
Oh, no, we'll work all the way through, usually depending on how strong the guys are, they might start with like, our strong guys may start with like 40% on the bar for their first warm-up set, and then they'll take it to, I'm about depending on where I'm at, that second set, I'll jump about 15%, and then everything after that's about 10%. And then I just start whittling down the reps as we go up in those percentages.
Yeah.
And I go up about 10% per set.
Okay. Is that in your staff, you mentioned earlier where you said that like everyone, you want people to have your blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
So on your staff, I'm making a grand assumption here. So
Sure.
I don't want to assume anything, but I'm guessing you have a guy that's really good at a guy or gal that's really good at like pure strength.
Yeah.
And a guy or gal's really good at like pure, like body weight, like vertical, broad. Like, do you let each one of them take control of like the weight room? Like if you're doing like a strength thing, like, yeah, I know, I don't want to take anything away from you, but
no,
is that like their show?
Man, I'm a big fan. Like, I hear horror stories of the lack of transferring leadership. And to me, I think one of the best things you can do as a leader is hand off leadership. And so usually what I'll do is I'll kind of call the warm up. You say we're running a room, I'll call the warm up, go through all of our, fundamental movements that we're going to do in our warm up. And then when we get to our primary exercise, I'm usually one running it. I want to trust my watch. My watch is the dictator. So I trust that. But then once we get through the primary exercise, I'm letting each coach run their areas on their own. Okay. There's days where I'll have my coaches, hey, today's your day, let's go. And to me, like, how else are you going to get that skill set to lead? How else, if you're interviewing for that next job and you've really, truly never led a room, like, how do you know what your voice is? How do you know what your projection is? How do you know if you've got buy-in? How do you know that you're not giving too much information or too little information? Like, I'm a firm believer of getting my people other jobs. Yeah. And I think they have to have those skills of leading to be able to do that.
Right.
And guess what it helps me with? I got 90 players. Like, it just helps solidify my message and our unity as a team. So there's a lot of other underlying variables that really help us out holistically, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think too, and being in the collegiate weight room, I wasn't in it as much as Dustin was. I was in it for almost 3 years back when you weren't paid to be an intern. And I remember head strength coach, Coach Durning, he would just let me run groups at times. And it didn't dawn on me until probably my senior year when I finally realized, like, if he hadn't done that and hadn't given me the control, A, I wouldn't have gotten the experience, but also B, I just would have been this guy that if I told him, like, hey, you need to sit back a little more in that squat, they wouldn't listen to me.
And how great of an opportunity is it? Because I'm sure he sat back with you and probably gave you feedback after that session. Here's what you did well. Here's what you did okay. Here's what you need to work on. And that's what I do. Yeah. Kind of have a quick debrief after session, say, here's what you guys did well. Here's what I'd like to see a little bit more emphasis on. And guess what? We have a session coming in 10 minutes. You got a chance to figure it out again. Yeah. So to me, like, it's a very powerful tool and it empowers them.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And the more confidence that is on a staff, the better that staff is. It just comes closer as a unit and just more interchangeable. Because heaven forbid something's going to happen at some point. Someone's not going to be able to make it in one day. If you can't step up into the boots, that's not a good signal. It's not good.
Yeah, I want to know. Like, I think it was last season I got COVID, and I missed 2 of our last 3 games, and I had 100% confidence in my guys running the room. 100. I had no qualms, no issues.
That there's a lot to be said in that statement as far as having a coach-led team and a player-led team. I think there's a lot of programs that maybe that never even comes across the table, but it's the old adage, what are you doing when there's no eyes watching and it's just about you? I mean, that's the real testament to what you've built, I think. So, I mean, that's awesome.
Well, Coach, we've had you on for almost an hour now. I know you're a busy man. You got the GM and a head coach walking through your facility.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get you out of here. I have one more question. I don't know if Dustin does. I have one more question.
I got 50.
You got 50?
We're working down the list.
Well, whittle 49 of them out, player.
I got one. I
got all kinds of questions.
If he can do it. I'm probably not doing him justice for the time, but I'm curious of the human being more than the coach really at this point.
Okay. So mine's a little more technical question than Dustin's, I think.
Hey, we got time for a couple.
Okay, all right. A couple.
Okay.
See that? Hear that? Dustin, you got a couple. We can take 48 out. That's good. There you go. So if worst case scenario, either in season or out of season, there's only one day in the weight room. I think as many days as they want on the field, practicing speed, agility, all the marches. What does that weight room session look like? Is it full body? Is it not? What is it?
Yeah, I would say it matters the day of the week that it is.
Okay.
Did we just finish it with the game or are we going to practice?
Okay.
Going back to the pigeonhole I was given, I would say total body, but these guys they've got to live in strength. Got to have strength. To me, strength is king, and it retains all the other qualities. And they're getting so much of the specificity of the power and the speed out there on the field that I know those qualities are happening. So I need strength to be hit, both lower extremity, upper extremity, and then I've got to be able to put in some of my auxiliary lifts, built in there as well. So a total body, but we've got to touch on that. We've got to touch more on the absolute strength or max strength range.
Okay. What are your favorite auxiliaries? Like what are your top two for upper, top two for lower? Like what's
God, that's a tough
and
question.
you don't have to say reverse hyper either.
Yeah. Oh no. Hey, I've got 4 reverse hypers in here.
Oh,
now.
okay. All right.
I've got 4 reverse hypers.
There you go.
My coaches were really excited when we brought those in. So, I would say, I like a good posterior chain movement, whether it's a reverse hyper, reverse hyper, back extension with rows. I mean, anything that can kind of give me an integrated posterior chain work. It's hard to say like what are your best auxiliaries.
Oh,
I'll
I
tell
know.
you what, man, I love push-ups. I love push-ups if we're looking at those as auxiliaries. I mean, to me, a push-up with the scapular movement and the health of the scapula and the humeral movement, I mean, it's pretty critical to be able to get that motion. I think a lot of times our primary exercises blunt the ability for the scapula to move cleanly. So I love push-ups as a primary, or as an auxiliary-based exercise.
Okay. Do you have them pronate up top and roll all the way through?
It's a great question. So we'll do so protraction to me is like it's a double-edged sword. So if somebody comes up and they go into extreme protraction into their push-up, but they go into extreme thoracic spine flexion, to me, it's like I've got a million other exercises that I can work on: retraction, protraction, the scapula. I do look for a good, clean protraction, but if they have to go so hard that they change thoracic position, I'll just find another way to get that scapular protraction, retraction without augmenting too much of the thoracic spine. Because what I find then when people do that, here we go. When people get into a push-up and they go into extreme protraction, what they do is they start changing cervical and capital position. Okay. And to me, those can lead into a whole host of other repetitive stress type of things, whether it's a stenosis, whether it's just, poor upper extremity control, poor scapular humeral movement. So to me, it's like, what is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because a lot of the high school athletes and like college athletes I work with, when they bench for the speed or max, as soon as that bar comes down, they're looking at it and they're peaking. As soon as they peak, they start to roll into it. And I watch them do a push-up, and that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. That's exactly exactly a little like head ball.
My cue is lead with the sternum. And, they all lead with the head. When they lead with the head, they elevate the scapula. When you elevate the scapula, now the scapula can't move clean around the rib cage. So like everything has a cause and effect relationship. And then, our goal, like when we talked about sprinting earlier or something like how do we take things that are very complex and simplify them?
Right. Are you on the push-up? I know I'm kind of beating this dead horse, but are you having them actively engage their glutes and their lats the entire time? Or is it not really? Yeah, that's what you're looking for there.
Yeah, I mean, I want them to hold like good neutral positions, shoulder, knee, ankle. I'm looking at that kind of thing, almost like a plank, if you will. But ultimately, what I'm looking at is the how clean does the scapula move more than anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, rock on. All right, Dustin, what do you got, man?
Well, I had this conjured up. I had 4 Ps that I wanted him to answer that were my own 4 Ps as far as
Okay.
Oh,
I
you
know where
yeah.
this is
listened
going.
to some of my lectures, huh?
I know where this is going.
I've listened to all your lectures. I actually almost thought I had some. When's the last time you were at a conference and maybe presented something?
Man, it's been a while.
That's what I
It's been a
thought.
while.
I was certain I had some video on my phone that I took of you before there was like anything on YouTube. I was like, man, I'm pretty certain. I couldn't remember because it's been a long time. It's like,
Yeah.
man, I think I videoed him doing some stuff because, and I'll be honest, it might have been the only person I've ever videoed in a conference because I was like, I feel like a lot of stuff is perpetually, repackaged, same stuff. Very rarely am I like, oh, this is cool. I can use this. But anyhow, I'm gonna condense my progress of growth over time, your personal care, your philosophy, the personal direction you're headed now. I'm going to kind of sum all those things into, in this career, where you're kind of, I think if you're good and thoughtful, you're making this progress. But we really go into the depths of a lot of different things. And if you were to extrapolate that and map it onto your life for success, so you take, how we periodize things and how we make progression in the strength and conditioning sense, and we're able to pull those pieces out, from a philosophical standpoint. How do we map that onto people's lives to make progress, to make people better, to find success? It's one of those things that as I've done that over my career, and that's why I encourage other people, like, choose something you love doing and find a way to be good at it. And once you've done that, you can take that formula and apply that success across the board. You're one of those people who definitely has succeeded in different avenues, significantly. How are you doing that on the other side of things when you're not a coach? What are you doing? How are you still making that progress?
I have very poor time consideration into hobbies. I think most people in our field probably say, how do you find balance? How do you find balance? And I'm a true believer that there's no such thing as balance when you're look at our field. Look what we do, the three of us. We're here to help everybody attain. And so when you do that, you have to be incredibly selfless. And I think a lot of times when we see athletes who migrate into our line of work, we know most of them aren't going to make it because athletes historically have been so selfish that they can't be selfless. So to give you a better answer, like I try to, water, I said it earlier, I want to water the grass where my feet are. And even though I might not be at home as often or anything like that, I do try to make wherever I'm at meaningful. Because I do know that I'm going to work a lot. I do know that I still own a facility. I do know that I have these other commitments that I've committed to other people, but for my family, my wife and my 2 daughters, like I need to be present when I'm there. I need to be considerate. I need to go above and beyond and communicate with them. The things that give me great peace and joy in our field is truly coming home and still continuing to study, read research articles, and listen to, some of the up and coming coaches in our field, or some of the coaches who have stood the test of time, and listening to them and reaching out to those mentors that I mentioned earlier. Those are the things that regenerate my battery. I'm a very introverted person by nature. I'm very extroverted when I'm coaching and when I'm presenting, but anytime I'm at a conference, the first thing I do, I go right back to my hotel room and I shut it all down. I don't like to, I'm not the mingler. I'm not that guy. And I can do it, but it doesn't recharge my battery. So I don't know if I answered your question well, but I think from the periodization of a career like, you've got to be steadfast. You've got to be 1 foot in front of the other all the time. And, you had said earlier that, it's been a linear path for me, but it's been, a lot of undulation. There's been a lot of failures that people haven't seen because I rarely broadcast anything good or bad.
Sure.
I let everybody else decide what it is that's happening. And you asked about presenting, like, those are things when I came to the Broncos, I made a conscious effort to sit there and say no to everything.
Yeah.
I rarely presented at any conferences. The last conference I presented, I got the job here and I flew out the next day to present in Ireland, I was there for 24 hours and I came right back home. And that was one of the last times I presented. Because to me, I owed it to the Denver Broncos and I owed it to these players to learn the NFL. I had to learn the NFL. It's not like, hey, here's my program and let's make this thing work. You have to learn and you have to smell, taste, and breathe it. So I shut down a lot of things. This is probably the first podcast I've probably done 4 or 5 podcasts since I've been at the Broncos for 4 years. So I really tried to really stop everything and really focus in on that. So, I'm not good at having a lot of outs as far as regenerating. Like I love the field too much to do that. Let me hit this on another end too. If people want to be successful in our field, they have to be passionate about the craft. They have to be 100% passionate about the craft. They have to have a growth mindset, and they have to be honest and trustworthy people, because you're dealing with, you're dealing with people's lives and maybe their livelihood, and you've got to be able to be there, and you've got to be consistent, and all these other things that come with it. It's not an easy job. It's a rewarding job that we all have, but it's not an easy job.
Yeah.
No, I think
I think I got verbal diarrhea there, huh?
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful statement, because I think these are all things that, had someone really been told some of those things and take the time to really think about them, like, you kind of touch on it. What are these professions selecting for? When you're an athlete, an elite athlete, the amount of selfishness that the environment selects for is going to tailor that these are kind of individuals that are organized this way. And the same thing goes for coaches. Look at the selection process. A lot of people have to go through these years of unpaid internships. What is that weeding out? What is that selecting for? I mean, that's why you get a lot of similar personalities, maybe more so than other professions, with what we do, because what is the profession selecting for? What does that career path look like? A lot of those people are going through those similar struggles and maybe didn't have an honest conversation with themselves. Like, is that who I am? Is that what I want to do? Would I prefer delivering packages for FedEx? And that's going to bring me a lot more joy in my life, and those are just really important things, because I wish I had the real numbers on this, because you've probably seen this too. Coaches that make this investment, getting their masters, doing all this stuff, and then they get burned out 3 years into their first paid job.
Mm-hmm.
And, that sucks to see, because I mean, some of the best coaches that I would have thought, had the same passion that I had for it, or maybe more, or at least equal to, were just toast, toast. And they were great, but the environment just toasted them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we run internships all the time in my facility. And, back when I was there, I would sit down with the intern classes and say, look, like, most people go into this profession because they don't want to sit at a desk job. They want to wear sweats to work. They want to call their own hours on the private side.
Sure.
I said, let me tell you something. Like, it's not easy, and it's not for the faint of heart. Like, when you're eating what you kill, when it comes to your livelihood as an independent contractor and things like that, like, there's always a consequence to whatever decision you make. Hey, I want to work 6 days a week and work 10 hours a day. Guess what? You're going to make a lot of money. But you want to work 4 days a week and you want to have 3 days off every week. Well, guess what? You're not going to make as much. So you have to decide who it is that you want to be and what you're ultimately in it for. But to your point, like, I'd say most practitioners, it's 2 to 3 years and then they're out.
Yeah. Coach, do you find that during those internships, and like Dustin and I both interned in college, and we did like the long, like the 3:30 a.m. mornings and like the long Saturday. Oh yeah, it was great. Loved it. Wouldn't trade it in for anything else. Do you find that some people, they start it and they have this like glimmer in their eye, and by halfway through it, it's gone, because they realize like, oh, I don't know if I want to get up at 4 a.m. and I'm gonna be here till 6, 5 days a week, and maybe sometimes on Saturday. Like, is that something you see habitually, or just few?
I think they do a pretty good job of vetting the potential intern candidates out over there now. Mm-hmm. But I can honestly say that you do see that. And our facility is pretty unique. I'll be honest with you. Like, a lot of private facilities, like, we have some of the top UFC fighters in the world that come in. We have, Olympians that come in. We have MLB, NHL, a lot of NFL players come in. So you're constantly stimulated with the eye candy of the industry.
Oh, that's a good point.
As a young coach, and then all of a sudden they get to the afternoon hours and they're like, all these kids, so, and I think they don't realize like how exhausting of a day it can be. And very few people really work with the elites, and that if you really want to make money in this field, like, it is working with the middle school and high school age athletes. And And you guess what? You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be tired. You're going to be emotionally spent when you get home at night. And I think some of those things scare people. I think that scares them.
It does. And that shift you're mentioning from, NFL, MLB, UFC, and then afternoon, you're dealing with middle schools, high schoolers. And, on the whole, the coaches that are doing, again, like certain people are doing the professionals, obviously, but on the whole, if you have a coach working with professionals in the afternoon, working with high schoolers, you have to have someone that's very proficient in communication across the board. And that's something I've seen. Like, I can have someone who was interning with me and I'm working with, and they've aced everything, they have a master's degree, everything. And they come in there, but they can't communicate from the country boy to the little princess. They can't do it. They're not to be mean, but it's almost like worthless, like in a mean way, because you can't communicate what you're trying to do across the board. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. And that goes back to what I said earlier, where, working with Gen Pops and things like that, like you learn so many things about communication, psychology, and motivation, that ultimately, and then working with the elementary aged athlete, and you're working with them for 30 minutes and all you're doing is you're skipping, like there's so much cool things to learn if you really just sit back and watch and have fun in your communication with the different ages and learn, that's a skillful coach. If you can work with that 6-7-year-old and then turn around and work with like some of the baddest dudes in the world who fight in the UFC, the ability to shift gears is going to make somebody an incredible coach.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, we've had you on for over an hour now. Is there anything that you want to plug, you want to say to everyone listening out there who aspires to be a coach, aspires to, take your job one day?
Nothing to plug, but this field is unique, and there's so many layers to our field. And some people get so captivated in technology and where it's going. And, the young practitioners need to remember, like, ultimately it comes down to fundamental practice, and the fundamentals will never fail you. So use all the other great technologies and things like that to help kind of help guide you and illuminate, but you got to just stay true to like fundamental principles and have your methods match.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. All right, good sir. We'll let you get back to just killing the game out there and enjoy that weather out there. And I'll talk to you soon.
Boom. Appreciate you guys.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good one.